For 15 years, she built the life that made him rich. And in less than 15 seconds, one phone notification told her she'd already been replaced. She used to make her husband stop breathing when she walked into a room, but now he walked past her like she was furniture. The master bedroom door clicked shut behind Julio Stevenson, leaving Kathy alone with her reflection in the full-length mirror, the same mirror he'd once pressed her against, unable to keep his hands off her slim waist. She stood there in her cotton nightgown, the fabric clinging to curves that hadn't existed 15 years ago. Her fingers traced the soft flesh where her flat stomach used to be, the wideness of hips that had carried 2 babies, the fullness of arms that had built his empire while he built his image. From downstairs, she could hear Julio's voice on a business call, the confident boom of a man who'd forgotten what his success had cost someone else. His laugh echoed through their Beverly Hills mansion, not the warm laugh he used to save just for her, but the performative one he perfected for clients and cocktail parties. The kind of laugh that made her invisible. Kathy turned sideways, studying herself the way she imagined Julio saw her now. Or rather, didn't see her. Because somewhere between the second pregnancy and the third promotion, between the school runs and the dinner parties she'd hosted to advance his career, she'd become background noise in her own marriage. What Julio didn't know, what he'd never bothered to notice, was that the woman staring back from that mirror had been keeping score. Every ignored anniversary. Every compliment that stopped coming. Every time his eyes lingered a second too long on his phone screen, double-tapping photos of women who looked nothing like the mother of his children. Before we go any further, there's something important this story is quietly teaching, and it's something many people never learn until it's too late. What you're about to witness is not just a love story breaking apart. It's a real-life example of what psychologists and relationship experts call invisible labor imbalance. When one partner's emotional, physical, and mental work sustains the entire household, while the other receives the credit. Over time, this imbalance doesn't just create exhaustion, it creates erosion. Attraction fades, communication collapses, and resentment grows in silence. Not because one partner failed, but because sacrifice went unseen and unvalued. This story also explores how body changes after pregnancy, hormonal shifts, sleep deprivation, and identity loss can deeply affect marriages, especially when one partner measures love through appearance instead of commitment. As you watch, pay attention to the small moments, the missed questions, the unspoken fatigue, the way love quietly turns into obligation. Because for many couples, betrayal doesn't begin with cheating, it begins with emotional neglect. Now, before we go any further, let me just say, my beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're ready for another unforgettable story, do me a quick favor, hit that like button. Why? Because each like tells YouTube this story is worth sharing with more people who might really need it today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I do read every single one, and it makes me feel like we're sitting together in the same room, sharing these moments heart to heart. Whether you're watching from Los Angeles, London, Australia, California, or anywhere else in this beautiful world, you're part of this family. And don't forget to share this video with someone you love. You never know, the story you share might be the encouragement they've been praying for. Most importantly, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a story when it drops. This isn't just a channel, it's a family. And when you engage, you're helping us build a safe space where real stories bring real hope. Now, let's return to that bedroom where Kathy Morrison is about to discover exactly what her husband has been hiding behind those endless business calls. She pulled open the closet door, reaching for something comfortable, when Julio's phone buzzed on his nightstand, forgotten in his rush to take that important call. The screen lit up with a notification. An Instagram message. From someone named Linda. The preview showed just enough, a heart emoji and the words "can't wait for tomorrow night." Kathy's hand hesitated over the phone. She could ignore it, pretend she hadn't seen it, go back to being the supportive wife who kept his home perfect while her body became imperfect. Or she could finally face what she'd been feeling in her bones for months, that slow, creeping sensation of being replaced before you've even been told you're being let go. But to understand how Kathy ended up here, 43 years old, 30 pounds heavier, staring at evidence of her husband's betrayal, we need to go back to when Julio couldn't imagine wanting anyone else. Back to when Kathy's laugh could make him cancel meetings, when her opinion mattered more than his board of directors, when her body was a temple he worshipped instead of a disappointment he avoided. Because every marriage that ends in betrayal starts with a promise that feels unbreakable. And Julio Stevenson had once promised Kathy she'd be the only woman he'd ever need. 15 years earlier, Kathy Williams could stop traffic on Rodeo Drive without trying. She had that kind of effortless beauty that made other women study her secretly, trying to decode the formula. Was it the way her collarbones created perfect shadows, or how her size 2 dresses hung like water on her frame? Men would lose their train of thought mid-sentence when she walked past their restaurant tables, her laugh floating through Beverly Hills bistros like expensive perfume. Julio Stevenson had been one of those men, struck silent at a charity gala when she glided past him in a black cocktail dress that cost less than his watch but looked like couture on her body. He'd spent the entire evening maneuvering for an introduction, abandoning potential clients just to position himself in her orbit. When she'd finally noticed him, really noticed him, and smiled, he'd felt chosen. Selected. Elevated. The wedding photos from their Malibu ceremony told the story of a man who couldn't believe his fortune. In every shot, Julio's eyes tracked Kathy like she might evaporate if he looked away. His hand perpetually at the small of her back, claiming her, announcing to every guest that this radiant woman had picked him. She'd been 28 then, all sharp cheekbones and toned arms for morning yoga classes she never missed. He'd been 32, hungry for success but hungrier for her approval. Those early years moved like a romantic film montage. Kathy would surprise him at the office with lunch from his favorite Thai place, and his colleagues would watch enviously as she perched on his desk, feeding him spring rolls while reviewing his presentations. She had this gift for making him feel invincible, her faith in his potential so absolute that he started believing it himself. When he pitched his first major development project, it was Kathy who'd stayed up until 3 a.m. helping him rehearse, wearing one of his dress shirts and nothing else, turning anxiety into anticipation with just her presence. But marriages aren't montages. They're daily negotiations that nobody warns you about. The shift started so subtly that neither of them named it. After Julio landed that first big project, Kathy had suggested they start trying for children. She'd already begun the invisible work of researching neighborhoods with good schools, comparing pediatricians, calculating how they'd manage on one income during maternity leave. She created spreadsheets he never looked at, made appointments he never attended, started taking prenatal vitamins while he started staying later at the office. If you're relating to this already, drop a comment below. How many of you have watched your partner's career grow while your world got smaller? And don't forget to hit that like button because these stories matter, and your engagement helps other women find them when they need them most. The first pregnancy changed her body in ways the magazines don't discuss. Not just the weight, though 30 pounds arrived and decided to stay, but the bone-deep exhaustion that made her cancel those yoga classes. The way her brain, once sharp enough to debate politics at dinner parties, now struggled to remember if she'd taken her vitamins. She'd stand in front of the mirror some mornings, searching for the woman Julio had married, finding instead someone who looked like her tired older sister. Julio noticed too, though he'd never say it directly. Instead, his compliments developed qualifiers. She looked good considering everything. She was handling things well for a new mom. That dress was flattering for her current shape. Each phrase perfectly designed to sound supportive while planting seeds of inadequacy. The second pregnancy, with the twins, accelerated everything. Kathy's days became tactical operations, coordinating 3 children under 4, managing household staff Julio never spoke to, maintaining the facade of effortless prosperity their social circle expected. She became the family CEO while Julio became the celebrity. He'd arrive at school events like a guest star making a cameo, basking in praise for making time despite his busy schedule, while Kathy had been there every single day, invisible in her reliability. She'd catch glimpses of their old dynamic sometimes, Julio's hand finding hers at a party, his genuine laugh at something she'd whispered, but these moments grew rarer, like radio signals from a distant station growing weaker. The power shift happened in increments too small to protest. Julio stopped asking her opinion about his projects, instead telling her about decisions already made. He'd book dinner reservations without checking her calendar, assuming she'd handle the babysitter logistics. He'd commit them to social events based on what would benefit his network, never considering that she might be too exhausted to perform the role of the perfect wife one more night. Kathy evolved too, but in the opposite direction. Where Julio expanded, his confidence, his network, his sense of importance, she contracted. She stopped suggesting restaurants because he'd inevitably changed the reservation. She stopped sharing her thoughts on his business because he'd already moved past listening. She stopped initiating intimacy because rejection from someone sleeping beside you cuts deeper than any stranger's cruelty. By their 10th anniversary, they'd become a case study in parallel lives. Julio, now 42 and silver-tempered in that distinguished way, commanded rooms. Kathy, 38 and 47 pounds heavier than her wedding day, had learned to fade into backgrounds. He'd grown larger than their marriage, while she'd shrunk to fit whatever space was left. The cruelest part? From the outside, they looked successful. The holiday cards showcasing their beautiful family. The charity galas where Julio's hand still rested on her back, not claiming her anymore, just steering her through crowds like a familiar accessory. Looking back now, standing in that bedroom with his phone glowing with another woman's messages, Kathy could identify the exact moment their marriage had stopped being a partnership, when Julio stopped seeing her weight gain as evidence of her sacrifice and started seeing it as evidence of her failure. But understanding how you became invisible doesn't immediately teach you how to be seen again. What Kathy hadn't yet realized was that her body's transformation told a story Julio refused to read, one written in stretch marks and sleepless nights, in missed meals and swallowed dreams. The weight she'd gained wasn't surrender. It was survival. And the pregnancy that had changed her body most dramatically was about to reveal exactly how little Julio understood about the price of building the life he now took credit for. The first pregnancy had been celebrated like a coronation. Julio had documented every milestone on social media. The announcement photo with tiny designer shoes, Kathy's growing bump in a silk dress at 6 months, the gender reveal party that cost more than most weddings. He'd been the devoted husband then, talking to her belly at night, researching the safest car seats, transforming the guest room into a nursery that looked like a Pottery Barn catalog. What the photos didn't capture was Kathy vomiting every morning for 16 weeks, the metallic taste that made her favorite foods repulsive, the way her body began hoarding weight like it was preparing for a famine. 20 pounds in the first trimester alone, despite barely keeping anything down. Her doctor assured her it was normal, hormones, water retention, the body's wisdom. Julio had nodded along during appointments, but she'd caught him later Googling wife gaining too much weight during pregnancy. After Daniel was born, 9 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect baby boy, Kathy's body didn't snap back like the celebrities Julio followed on Instagram. Those women posted bikini photos 6 weeks postpartum with captions about bouncing back. Kathy was still wearing mesh underwear and bleeding through industrial-sized pads, her stomach a deflated balloon of loose skin that no amount of cocoa butter could tighten. She tried to explain to Julio what was happening inside her, the hormone crashes that made her cry over cereal commercials, the way breastfeeding felt like someone was siphoning her life force every 3 hours, how she could actually feel her metabolism slowing like a computer running too many programs. He listened with the vacant attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, then suggested she try that new fitness program his secretary had mentioned. The twins came 18 months later. Unplanned. Overwhelming. 2 babies growing inside a body that hadn't recovered from growing the first one. This pregnancy was different from the start. No celebration photos. No belly talking. Just Julio's carefully controlled panic about college funds and private school tuition, as if Kathy had somehow conspired with her ovaries to complicate his financial projections. She'd gained 60 pounds this time, her body expanding beyond recognition. Her feet swelled until her wedding rings lived in the jewelry box. Her face rounded. Her arms thickened. She developed a chin that hadn't existed before, a small pocket of flesh that would never quite go away. If you're a mother watching this, you know exactly what I'm describing. That moment when you realize your body has been colonized by something bigger than vanity, bigger than your marriage, bigger than your husband's approval. Hit that like button if you've been there, because we need to normalize these conversations. The twins, Emma and Ethan, arrived 6 weeks early, turning their household into a NICU rotation of pumping schedules and weight checks. Kathy existed on 2 hours of broken sleep, her body producing milk for 2 while trying to heal from a cesarean that Julio couldn't watch. He turned away when they'd pulled the babies out, his face pale, and later admitted the surgery had made her seem too medical, too raw. That was when the touching stopped. Not all at once. Julio wasn't cruel enough for sudden withdrawal. Instead, it was a gradual retreat disguised as consideration. He'd sleep in the guest room, so she could rest better. He'd kiss her forehead instead of her mouth. He'd pat her shoulder where he used to grip her waist. She'd reach for him in bed and find empty space, his body turned away, always with a reasonable excuse. Early meeting. Headache. Stressed about the Patterson project. 40 pounds from the first pregnancy. 60 from the second. 20 that arrived during those sleep-deprived months when she ate whatever she could grab between feedings. The math was simple. Kathy now weighed 190 pounds on a frame that had carried 120 on their wedding day. But weight was just a number. The real change was in Julio's eyes, how they skimmed over her now, never landing, never lingering. She'd walk into a room and watch him consciously choose to look at his phone. She'd dress carefully for date nights that he'd cancel last minute. She'd wait for compliments that became extinct, replaced by suggestions. Had she considered intermittent fasting? Maybe she'd feel better if she exercised? His trainer's wife had lost all her baby weight with keto. The silence grew louder than any argument. They became roommates raising children together, their interactions purely logistical. Who was taking Daniel to soccer? Did she handle the twins' vaccination appointments? Could she please not leave her pumping supplies on the kitchen counter where clients might see them? Sex became a quarterly obligation, performed in darkness with minimal contact. Julio would finish quickly, efficiently, like he was completing a task on his to-do list. Kathy would lie there afterward, feeling lonelier than if he'd never touched her at all. She'd remember how he used to worship her body, spending hours exploring every inch, and wonder if she was remembering a different man entirely. The cruelest part was the gaslighting disguised as concern. When she'd mention feeling disconnected, Julio would remind her how hard he was working to provide for their expanded family. When she'd suggest couples therapy, he'd point out that she seemed depressed and should probably work on herself first. When she'd cry after another rejected advance, he'd patiently explain that stress affected his libido and she shouldn't take it personally. Drop a comment if you've heard these exact words, because I know you're out there. The women who've been told their feelings are the problem. Who've been made to feel crazy for wanting their husbands to desire them. By the twins' second birthday, Kathy had stopped trying to decode Julio's distance. She'd accepted that her body had become evidence of her failures rather than her sacrifices. Those stretch marks weren't battle scars from creating life. They were flaws that made her unworthy of desire. That soft belly wasn't proof she'd housed 3 humans. It was why her husband scrolled through Instagram models while sitting beside her. She'd stand in that bedroom mirror sometimes, after everyone was asleep, and try to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Not needed, the children needed her constantly. But wanted. Chosen. Pursued. She didn't know yet that Julio had already started choosing someone else. While Kathy was managing 3 children under 4, coordinating their lives down to 15-minute increments, Julio was building something too, not just his business empire, but a growing resentment toward the woman who made his success possible. The house that had once felt like their shared dream was about to become a stage where Kathy performed the role of wife and mother while Julio planned his exit. The Beverly Hills house had 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, and 1 woman holding it all together. From the outside, the Mediterranean-style mansion looked like success incarnate, manicured hedges framing the circular driveway, a fountain that never stopped flowing, windows that gleamed because Kathy had memorized the cleaning crew's schedule and worked around it. Neighbors walking their designer dogs would slow down to admire the seasonal wreaths she'd selected, the way the landscape lighting made everything glow like a magazine spread. Inside, Kathy orchestrated a symphony of schedules that would have broken a Fortune 500 CEO. Daniel soccer practice at 4:15, snack packed, uniform washed, backup shin guards in the car. The twins' Mandarin tutor at 5:30, worksheets printed, room prepared, payment ready. Julio's dry cleaning picked up before noon because he'd mentioned needing his navy suit for Thursday's investor meeting, a meeting he'd forgotten to tell her about until Wednesday night. She kept 17 different calendars synced, the family's master schedule, each child's school calendar, Julio's business obligations, sports schedules, doctor appointments, birthday parties they couldn't miss, charity events where their absence would be noticed. Her phone contained 847 contacts, mostly people whose names Julio wouldn't recognize but who kept their life running. The pediatric dentist who'd squeeze them in last minute. The mom who could grab Daniel if the twins were sick. The pharmacy tech who'd expedite prescriptions. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., before anyone else stirred, Kathy would pad through their house like a ghost preparing for the living. Breakfast laid out in the order each child would wake. Backpacks checked for homework Julio never knew existed. Permission slips signed with his signature she'd perfected because asking him to actually sign would mean explaining what the field trip was for, and he'd make that face, the one that said her world was too small to warrant his attention. She'd learned to move silently, efficiently, invisibly. When contractors came to fix the pool heater, they dealt with Kathy. When the school called about Daniel's behavior, they called Kathy. When the country club needed menu selections for the holiday party, they emailed Kathy. But when those same people saw Julio at events, they'd praise him for his beautiful home, his well-behaved children, his successful life. He'd accept these compliments like an award he'd earned, never mentioning the woman who'd selected every piece of furniture they admired, who'd interviewed 12 nannies before finding the right one, who'd researched school districts until her eyes burned. If this sounds like your life, share this video with another woman who needs to hear she's not alone. Because the invisible labor of marriage is real, and we need to start naming it. Julio's contribution to their household had evolved into a single role, provider of money and receiver of credit. He'd transfer funds to their joint account with the satisfied air of a man who'd fulfilled his obligation. When friends complimented their son's manners, Julio would nod knowingly, as if he'd personally instilled them. When colleagues admired family photos in his office, he'd tell charming stories about their decision to start the twins in music lessons early, lessons he'd never attended, instruments he couldn't identify, recitals marked in his calendar that he'd skipped for client dinners. The resentment built like sediment in a pipe, invisible until it backed up. Kathy would stand in their chef's kitchen, the one she designed, sourcing every appliance, and feel rage bubble up at the sight of Julio's coffee mug left precisely where he'd finished with it, 2 inches from the dishwasher. That mug represented everything. The assumption she'd handle it. The inability to see her labor. The casual disrespect disguised as distraction. She'd started keeping score without meaning to. The birthday parties Julio missed, 15. The parent-teacher conferences he'd forgotten, 8. The times he'd promised to be home for bedtime then texted at 9 p.m. about running late, 67 and counting. Meanwhile, Julio nursed his own poisonous narrative. He felt trapped in a house that ran on schedules he didn't create, rules he didn't understand, obligations he hadn't chosen. When he'd pictured marriage, he'd imagined Kathy, the original Kathy, the size 2 Kathy, waiting for him with a martini and a smile, not a woman in yesterday's yoga pants rattling off tomorrow's logistics while simultaneously cutting crusts off sandwiches. He'd complain to his business partners during late-night drinks about the predictability of suburban life. They'd nod sympathetically, these men who also had wives at home managing their children, and they'd toast to the burden of provision, never recognizing the burden of maintenance. The house became a metaphor neither of them acknowledged. Kathy maintained its foundation while Julio decorated its facade. She handled the septic backup while he hosted the cocktail party. She knew which circuit breaker controlled what while he knew which wine to serve which guest. Some evenings, after the children were asleep, they'd pass each other in the hallway like shift workers changing posts. Julio heading to his home office to answer emails from people who thought he was important. Kathy heading to the laundry room to wash clothes for people who needed her labor but not her presence. She'd sometimes wonder if this was what her mother had meant when she'd warned that marriage was work. But her mother's generation didn't have Instagram, didn't watch their husbands double-tap photos of women who hadn't sacrificed their bodies or ambitions, women who still looked like prizes instead of partners. Drop a comment if you understand this exhaustion, not just physical, but existential. The tiredness that comes from being essential but invisible. And please, hit that subscribe button because these stories matter more than we admit. The breaking point came on a Thursday that seemed like any other. Kathy had managed 6 contractor visits, 2 sick children, a parent-teacher conference Julio forgot, and dinner for his business associates, a dinner where he'd introduced her as the woman who keeps everything running smoothly while she served appetizers in a dress that hid her exhaustion. After the guests left, Julio had kissed her forehead, that patronizing forehead kiss, and said something that would echo in her mind for months, "I don't know what I'd do without you handling all this." All this. As if her life's work was an afterthought. As if she was staff. That night, while Julio slept contentedly in their California king bed, Kathy sat in the kitchen she designed and realized the truth. Some men don't want partners. They want infrastructure. They want the benefits of a home without acknowledging the architect. But Kathy's growing invisibility in her own home was about to be replaced by something worse. The moment when Julio's eyes started seeking visibility elsewhere, when his phone became a window to women who hadn't been worn down by his indifference, women who still looked like victories instead of volunteers. The notification sound from Julio's phone had become the soundtrack to their marriage, that soft ping that pulled his attention away mid-sentence, mid-dinner, mid-everything. It started innocently enough. Julio claimed he needed Instagram for business networking, for staying current with market trends, for maintaining professional connections. Kathy would watch him scroll while she loaded the dishwasher, his thumb moving in that hypnotic upward motion, his face illuminated by filtered lives that required no maintenance. At first, he followed architecture accounts, real estate moguls, business podcasts. But the algorithm learned him quickly, started serving what he lingered on: fitness models doing morning routines in sports bras, travel bloggers posing in infinity pools, young entrepreneurs who somehow built empires without ever looking tired. Women who existed in a permanent state of readiness, their bodies unmarked by life, their smiles suggesting they'd never cleaned vomit at 3 a.m. Kathy noticed the shift in his breathing when certain images appeared. The way he'd screenshot things. The sudden interest in her health that coincided with his discovery of yogis who could fold themselves into pretzels while maintaining perfect makeup. Then Linda Norwood appeared in his suggested follows. 28 years old. Marketing consultant. Beverly Hills local. Her grid was a masterclass in curation. Green smoothies held by manicured hands, workout videos where sweat never disturbed her contour, inspirational quotes about choosing joy overlaid on sunset photos where her silhouette looked carved from marble. The first interaction was nothing. A like on her photo from a charity gala they both attended, Julio in his Tom Ford suit with Kathy beside him, cropped out of his posted version. Linda had commented with a simple "great seeing you" and 3 champagne emojis. Professional. Friendly. Forgettable. Except Julio didn't forget. He liked her next post. Then the next. Then went back through 6 months of content, double-tapping photos of her in Cabo, her at Pilates, her laughing at brunch with friends who looked like they'd stepped out of a wellness catalog. Kathy discovered this by accident, looking for a photo on his phone to show her mother. His Instagram was open to Linda's profile, the history of purple hearts and fire emojis he'd left like breadcrumbs leading away from their marriage. If you've ever felt your stomach drop from finding something you weren't meant to see, type "I've been there" in the comments. Because this digital betrayal is becoming the new lipstick on the collar, and we need to talk about it. The comparison started seeping into their real life like water through drywall, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. Julio began making observations that felt like paper cuts. "You know, the Henderson's wife runs marathons now. Miller's partner started that wellness brand. She looks 10 years younger. Have you considered trying that new gym on Wilshire? I heard they have childcare." Each comment came wrapped in false concern, delivered while his eyes stayed on his screen, scrolling through bodies that hadn't built his children, lives that looked like permanent vacations, women who performed femininity like it was their job, because for many of them it was. Kathy watched her husband transform into someone she didn't recognize. He started going to the gym at 5 a.m., posting post-workout selfies with hashtags he'd never used before, #beastmode, #neversettle, #levelup. He bought new cologne, grew particular about his grooming, started intermittent fasting and talking about it constantly, not to Kathy, but to his phone, in stories she'd watch from the kitchen while making school lunches. The criticism of Kathy became more direct, though still disguised as motivation. He'd leave fitness influencer videos open on the iPad. He'd mentioned that Linda had recommended a nutritionist for people our age who want to maintain vitality. He'd buy her workout clothes for her birthday, size medium, when she wore extra large, the tag still attached like an accusation. But the cruelest part was watching him light up for notifications while sitting across from her at dinner. The way his face would animate reading messages, then flatten when he looked up to find his actual wife asking about his day. She became the intermission between his real life online and his obligation offline. Linda started appearing at events they attended. Coincidentally. Always perfectly positioned, close enough to be seen, far enough to seem appropriate. She'd wave with fingertips, her body language creating invitation without approaching. Kathy would watch Julio track her through crowds, his attention split between the conversation he was having and the woman who represented everything his wife no longer was. Hit that like button if you understand the exhaustion of competing with filtered strangers for your own husband's attention. And subscribe, because we're about to expose exactly how these digital affairs destroy real marriages. The night Kathy finally confronted him, calmly, carefully, about the excessive time on his phone, Julio's response was textbook gaslighting. She was being paranoid. She was projecting her insecurities. Maybe if she worked on herself instead of monitoring him, they'd both be happier. Besides, Linda was just a professional contact. The messages were about a potential collaboration. The likes meant nothing. But bodies know what minds deny. Kathy felt the shift in their bedroom, how Julio would angle away from her, phone tilted so she couldn't see. How he'd smile at the screen with an expression he hadn't given her in years. How he'd excuse himself to take calls that didn't sound like business, his voice dropping to that intimate register reserved for someone you're trying to impress. The comparison had become complete. Kathy wasn't competing with Linda Norwood. She was competing with the idea of Linda Norwood. The fantasy of a woman without stretch marks or eye bags, who never nagged about homework or doctor's appointments, who existed in a perpetual state of being pursued rather than pursuing. By the time Linda sent that first direct message, "Hope I'm not overstepping, but coffee sometime?" she wasn't starting something new. She was simply claiming territory Julio had already mentally surrendered. The coffee would happen. Then drinks. Then the conversation that would shatter everything Kathy thought she knew about the length of her husband's deception. Because when Julio finally said the words "I'm not happy," he'd already been gone for months, maybe years, his body in their house but his mind in Linda's DMs, building an exit strategy while Kathy was still building their life. It happened on a Tuesday morning while Kathy was separating the twins' vitamins into their weekly containers. The gummy ones Emma liked shaped like bears, the chewable ones Ethan preferred that tasted like artificial orange. Julio stood in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed for work while she was still in her robe, the one with the coffee stain on the sleeve she kept meaning to wash. He had that look, the one she'd seen before difficult client calls, when he needed to deliver news that would disappoint someone. She didn't realize the someone was her. "We need to talk," he said, then waited for her to stop what she was doing, as if organizing children's vitamins was less important than his announcement. When she turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen better days, he delivered the words with the clinical precision of a surgeon making an incision. "I'm not happy anymore." 4 words. Subject, verb, adjective, qualifier. A complete sentence that demolished an incomplete marriage. Kathy's first thought wasn't about Linda or Instagram or the way he'd been sleeping on his side of the bed like she was contagious. Her first thought was about the twin school play next week. Who would help with their costume if this meant what she thought it meant? She stood there, holding Tuesday's vitamins in her palm, trying to process what not happy meant in the context of their life. They had a mortgage. 3 children. A dinner party scheduled for the Hendersons next month. How did not happy fit into the infrastructure she'd spent 15 years building? Julio filled the silence with words that sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced in his Tesla on the way home from the gym. He talked about growth, about becoming different people, about the natural evolution of relationships. He used phrases like emotional journey and authentic self and individual paths, corporate speak applied to marriage dissolution, as if their family was a merger that no longer showed profitable projections. What he didn't say, Linda's name. The 247 Instagram messages they'd exchanged. The lunches that weren't about business. The hotel room in Santa Monica he'd charged to his personal card last Thursday when he was supposedly in Pasadena. If you're screaming at your screen right now because you've heard these same empty words, hit that like button. Because the language of leaving is universal, and cowards all read from the same script. Kathy asked practical questions because that's what her brain could handle. When had he decided this? Had he considered counseling? What about the children? Each question met with vague non-answers that revealed he'd been gone long before this conversation. He'd already consulted a lawyer, just to understand options. He'd already looked at apartments, to have a plan. He'd already mentally divided their assets, to be fair to everyone. Everyone except the woman standing in her kitchen, holding vitamins that would expire before her children finished them, trying to understand how sacrifice had become invisibility, how support had become suffocation, how the weight she'd gained carrying his children had become the weight he couldn't carry in their marriage. She wanted to scream about the unfairness of it all. About the nights she'd stayed up with sick children while he slept undisturbed. About the career she'd paused that became a full stop. About the body she'd surrendered to motherhood while he maintained his gym routine. About the emotional labor of keeping everyone happy while her own happiness evaporated like morning dew. Instead, she said nothing. Because what was there to say to someone who'd already left? Julio interpreted her silence as acceptance, maybe even relief. He moved into explanation mode, the way he did with clients when walking them through contracts. He'd continue supporting the family financially. The children would stay in their schools. They'd work out a schedule that minimized disruption. He used the word amicable 6 times, as if repetition would make it true. He never once acknowledged what Kathy had built, maintained, sacrificed. 15 years reduced to a situation that wasn't working. Their wedding vows, for better, for worse, in sickness, in health, apparently came with fine print about weight gain and Instagram models. Share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Because too many women are being left by men who lack the courage to admit why they're really leaving. The cruelest part was his visible relief once the words were out. His shoulders relaxed. He checked his phone, probably Linda asking how it went. He'd already moved on while Kathy was still trying to understand what she was moving on from. She thought about their beginning, when he'd pursued her like she was the answer to everything. She thought about their middle, when pursuing became assuming, when romance became routine. She thought about this ending, delivered like a memo, efficiently and without emotion. That night, after Julio left for his previously scheduled business dinner code for Linda, though Kathy wouldn't confirm this until weeks later, she sat in their bedroom and realized the truth. She'd confused exhaustion for normalcy. She'd mistaken his distance for typical marriage fatigue. She'd interpreted his cruelty as stress. She'd been so busy managing their life that she hadn't noticed he'd stopped living it with her. The children asked where Daddy was at bedtime. She told them he was working, the lie comfortable and familiar. Emma wanted to know if Daddy would be at her recital. Ethan wondered if Daddy could fix his robot toy. Daniel, older and more observant, asked nothing but watched everything. Kathy tucked them in with the same routine, songs for the twins, a chapter of Harry Potter for Daniel, while her world collapsed in silence. This was motherhood, performing stability while experiencing earthquake. By the time she finally cried, alone in the shower, where the sound wouldn't travel, she understood what Julio's "I'm not happy" really meant. It wasn't a confession or a conversation starter. It was an announcement of what he'd already decided, probably months ago, while she was still meal planning and making pediatric appointments and believing that marriage meant weathering unhappiness together. Some people leave without ever telling the truth. They use words like happiness and growth to avoid saying, "I found someone younger," or "I'm shallow," or "I never learned that love is a verb, not just a feeling." The next morning, Julio's departure became public when Linda posted a photo from brunch, the same restaurant where he'd proposed to Kathy 16 years earlier. The caption read "New Beginnings Clinking Glasses," and Julio's comment, a single red heart, told everyone what he'd never had the courage to tell his wife directly. The photo appeared on Instagram 3 days after Julio moved into his furnished apartment in West Hollywood. Linda Norwood, tagged at Giorgio Baldi in Malibu, her hand strategically placed on the table to display a Cartier bracelet that cost more than Kathy's minivan. She wore white. Of course she wore white. A blazer dress that would have been destroyed in 5 minutes by sticky fingers or spilled juice boxes, her skin glowing with that expensive dewiness that comes from facial treatments, not exhaustion. Julio sat across from her, leaning forward like she was dispensing wisdom instead of taking selfies between courses. The likes poured in immediately. Heart emojis from his business associates. Fire symbols from men who'd sat at Kathy's dinner table eating her cooking while their own wives were home. Comments about how happy he looked, how radiant they were together, how sometimes change is necessary for growth. Not one person mentioned the woman who'd been erased. Kathy discovered the photo while waiting in the school pickup line, her phone burning in her hand as she watched her replacement accumulate praise. Linda had that specific type of beauty that photographed well from every angle: sharp jawline, collarbones like architectural features, arms that had never carried 3 children at once up the stairs. The whispers started before Kathy even made it home. Her phone buzzed with texts disguised as concern. "Thinking of you." From mothers who were really fishing for details. "Here if you need to talk." From acquaintances suddenly interested in her well-being. "Just saw something online, so sorry." From people who weren't sorry at all, just eager to witness someone else's catastrophe. The country club was worse. Conversations halted when Kathy entered the dining room with the children. Women who'd complimented her patience and dedication now studied her body with forensic attention, clearly cataloging the reasons Julio had upgraded. She could practically hear their thoughts. "Well, she did let herself go. Can you blame him? I'd never allow myself to gain that much weight." Type "Stop the judgment" in the comments if you're tired of women being blamed for men's infidelity. Because we need to stop making excuses for shallow men and start supporting the women they abandon. Linda began appearing everywhere, always photographed, always perfect. At charity galas Kathy had organized but could no longer attend. At restaurants where Kathy had celebrated anniversaries. At the Beverly Hills Hotel pool where Kathy had taught Daniel to swim. Each appearance meticulously documented, Hashtag blessed life hashtag new chapter hashtag love wins. The algorithm, cruel in its efficiency, kept serving Kathy content she didn't want to see. Linda doing yoga at sunrise. Linda and Julio at wine tastings. Linda playing with someone else's children at a park, the caption reading practice run, while Kathy's actual children asked why daddy's new friend was always on mommy's phone. The comments under these posts became a masterclass in casual misogyny. Men congratulating Julio for living his best life. Women calling Linda goals and inspiration. Everyone agreeing that happiness was what mattered most, as if Kathy's happiness had ever been part of the equation. Meanwhile, Kathy stood in her bathroom mirror each morning, seeing her body through Julio's eyes, through Linda's Instagram filter, through society's measuring tape. Every curve felt like evidence of her failure. Every stretch mark seemed to scream that she deserved abandonment. Every soft place that had nurtured life now felt like a reason for rejection. The rage came in waves. Not the clean, cathartic anger of movies, but the messy, poisonous kind that made her hands shake while signing permission slips. She wanted to comment under every photo, to list what those Cartier bracelets had cost in sacrifice. To explain that Julio's glow came from abandoning responsibility, not finding love. To scream that Linda was wearing jewelry bought with equity from a house Kathy had made a home. But she didn't. Because angry ex-wives become punchlines. Because defending yourself looks like desperation. Because the children were watching, always watching. Daniel, 12 and too perceptive, had already found the photos on his own phone. He'd stopped mentioning his father entirely, his silence louder than any accusation. The twins, still young enough to be confused rather than angry, asked painful questions. Why did Daddy's new friend look like the women on TV? Why didn't Daddy take them to restaurants anymore? Was Mommy sad because she wasn't pretty like Daddy's friend? If you're a parent reading this, smash that subscribe button. Because we need to talk about how these public replacements affect our children's understanding of love, loyalty, and women's worth. The most insidious part was how Linda performed generosity toward the situation. She'd post about blended families and conscious uncoupling, and everyone deserving happiness, as if she was a wellness guru instead of a woman dating someone's fresh divorce. She'd never acknowledge Kathy directly, but her posts read like passive-aggressive letters. Age is just a number when you're living authentically. Choose partners who choose growth. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants. 3 weeks after the first photo, Julio and Linda attended the Hamilton Academy fundraiser, the same fundraiser Kathy had chaired for 3 years. They walked the red carpet that Kathy had organized, bid on auction items Kathy had procured, sat at a table Kathy had decorated the previous year. The photos from that night showed Julio's hand on Linda's tiny waist, her head thrown back in practiced laughter, both of them looking like they'd been copied and pasted from a lifestyle blog. The comments celebrated their beauty, their chemistry, their obvious rightness for each other. No one mentioned the woman at home putting 3 children to bed alone, teaching them that love wasn't supposed to be conditional on your dress size. Kathy realized that night that replacement hurts most not because someone newer exists, but because society agrees you deserve to be replaced. Every like on Linda's photos felt like a vote against Kathy's worth. Every positive comment seemed to confirm that she'd failed by aging, by expanding, by being human. The cruelest irony? Linda was performing the exact role Kathy had once played, the decorative complement to Julio's success. But Linda didn't know yet what that performance would cost. She didn't know that Julio's love came with terms and conditions, that his attention was a lease, not a purchase. 6 months later, when Linda posted a photo from their new shared apartment, Julio's belongings barely unpacked, her smile slightly strained, those who looked closely could already see the cracks forming. Because fantasy can only survive reality for so long, and Linda was about to learn what Kathy had paid 15 years to understand. 6 months into their new life, Linda Norwood discovered that Julio's morning breath smelled like coffee and disappointment. The West Hollywood apartment that had looked so sophisticated in photos, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a kitchen that screamed we don't actually cook had become a stage for uncomfortable realizations. Linda's perfectly curated possessions clashed with Julio's actual life. His children's artwork, shoved into a drawer. Sports equipment that didn't match the aesthetic. The prescription bottles that reminded her he was 47, not the 35 he acted online. The first crack appeared during the twins' weekend visit. Linda had prepared organic snacks arranged on bamboo plates, educational activities downloaded on iPads, her outfit carefully selected to say fun but responsible. What she hadn't prepared for was Ethan's meltdown when the Wi-Fi stopped working, Emma's refusal to eat anything that wasn't beige, and both children asking repeatedly when they were going home to mommy. Julio disappeared into his office, claiming urgent calls, leaving Linda to manage chaos she'd only seen in movies where the beautiful woman somehow makes it look charming. There was nothing charming about Emma vomiting organic carrot sticks onto the white sofa or Ethan sobbing because Linda didn't know the specific way mommy cut his sandwiches: diagonal, not straight, crusts removed but not too much of the actual bread. She'd texted Julio from a bathroom where she'd escaped to cry, "Need help?" His response, "You're doing great, babe. Almost done with this call." The call lasted 3 hours. If you've ever dated someone with children and realized you're not equipped for the reality, type truth in the comments. Because Instagram doesn't prepare you for actual step-parenting. Linda's social media presence began shifting subtly. Fewer couple photos. More solo workout videos. The captions evolved from "living my best life" to "growth isn't always comfortable" to "learning to embrace chaos." Her friends noticed she'd stopped tagging locations when she was with Julio, stopped posting their dinner dates, stopped gushing about their connection. Meanwhile, Julio discovered that dating a 28-year-old meant absorbing 28-year-old problems. Linda's anxiety about her follower count. Her need for constant validation through likes and comments. Her meltdowns when brands didn't respond to collaboration requests. Her inability to sit through dinner without photographing every course, turning meals into photo shoots where the food got cold while she found perfect angles. He found himself missing conversations that didn't revolve around Instagram analytics. Missing someone who knew his coffee order without asking. Missing the steady rhythm of a household that ran without his input. A household Kathy had orchestrated so seamlessly he'd never appreciated the machinery behind it. The children became Linda's unwitting truth-tellers. Daniel refused to acknowledge her existence, staring through her like she was furniture. The twins compared everything she did to Mommy. Mommy's pancakes were fluffier. Mommy knew all the words to their bedtime songs. Mommy never forgot Mr. Bunny needed to face the door exactly right or Emma couldn't sleep. Julio started making excuses to avoid bringing them over. The apartment was too small. The commute was too long. The children were adjusting. Really, he couldn't bear watching Linda's incompetence with his offspring, her visible panic when they acted like actual children instead of props for lifestyle content. 3 months into cohabitation, Linda posted a photo that told the whole story. Her at a coffee shop, alone, caption reading, "Sometimes you need to reconnect with yourself." The comments flooded with support from other young women who recognized the coded message. She was drowning in someone else's life. Hit that like button if you understand that moving in together often kills the fantasy that distance kept alive. And subscribe for more truth about what happens when Instagram relationships meet reality. While Julio and Linda's fantasy imploded in real time, Kathy underwent her own transformation. Not the revenge makeover movies promise, but something quieter, more revolutionary. She stopped checking Linda's Instagram. Stopped comparing their bodies, their faces, their apparent happiness. She deleted the apps entirely, choosing blindness over daily wounds. The silence was initially unbearable, like breaking an addiction, but gradually became peaceful. She started saying no. No to hosting the PTA fundraiser she'd run for 5 years. No to managing the neighborhood holiday party. No to being available for Julio's scheduling conflicts. Each refusal felt like reclaiming territory in her own life. Her body began changing, not from desperate gym sessions aimed at winning Julio back, but from having energy previously spent on resentment. She walked the neighborhood in the mornings, not for weight loss but for sanity. She ate meals sitting down instead of standing at the counter between tasks. She slept in the middle of their king bed, spreading out like a starfish, luxuriating in space that had always been hers to claim. The children noticed their mother laughing again, real laughter, not the performative kind she'd maintained during the marriage's death throes. She danced in the kitchen while making dinner, badly but enthusiastically. She said yes to their messy art projects, no longer worried about maintaining perfection for a husband who wasn't watching anyway. Julio noticed too, during drop-offs and pickups. Kathy looked different. Not thinner, he would have noticed that, cataloged it, maybe even complimented it. But lighter somehow. Like she'd stopped carrying something heavy. She'd stopped asking about his schedule, stopped accommodating his changes, stopped trying to make transitions easier for him. One evening, dropping the twins off after a particularly disastrous weekend where Linda had tried to take them to a meditation class for children. It lasted 6 minutes. Julio lingered at the door. The house smelled like chocolate chip cookies and homework and stability. Kathy stood there in paint-splattered jeans and one of his old college sweatshirts she'd claimed in the divorce, looking more comfortable in her skin than she had in years. He almost said something, about missing this, about making a mistake, about Linda being nothing like he'd expected. But Kathy had already turned away, focusing on the children, on their real needs versus his imaginary ones. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that being chosen by someone else matters less than choosing yourself. Because self-worth isn't determined by who wants you, it's determined by who you decide to become. That night, Linda posted another cryptic message, "Not all that glitters is gold." Julio pretended not to understand, but he did. The fantasy was dying, suffocated by reality, by children who needed more than aesthetic appeal, by a partnership that required more than physical attraction, by the discovery that you can't build a life on someone else's ruins without inheriting the ghosts. 8 months after leaving his family for a woman who looked better in photos than in crisis, Julio would stand in an empty apartment, Linda having moved out while he was at work, taking only her ring light and leaving behind the mess of a man who'd confused upgrade with escape. The morning Kathy stopped apologizing for existing in her body was a Tuesday in November, 11 months after Julio had announced his unhappiness like a weather forecast. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the same mirror that had witnessed her self-hatred, her comparisons to Linda, her desperate calculations of calories and self-worth. But this morning was different. This morning, she saw what her body actually was, a map of her life's work. The stretch marks across her stomach weren't failures. They were proof she'd grown 3 humans from scratch. The soft arms weren't weakness. They were strong enough to carry twins upstairs while pregnant with another child. The fuller face wasn't letting herself go. It was the face of someone who'd chosen to feed her children first, always first, even when it meant eating their leftovers standing at the sink. She didn't step on the scale. She'd thrown it away 3 months earlier, tired of letting a number dictate her mood. Instead, she put on clothes that fit her current body, not the body she used to have, not the body she might have someday, but the body carrying her through today. The transformation wasn't about weight loss. It was about weightlifting, the weight of shame, of comparison, of trying to shrink herself back into someone else's preferences. Daniel noticed first. His mother had started taking up space unapologetically. She'd speak at school meetings without prefacing her opinions with apologies. She'd order dessert at restaurants without explaining she'd been good all week. She'd swim at the community pool without a cover-up, her body moving through water like it remembered joy. If you're tired of apologizing for your body, type enough in the comments. Because we need to stop treating our bodies like public property, requiring constant explanation. The twins absorbed their mother's new energy like plants turning towards sun. Emma stopped asking if she looked pretty in her dresses, instead asking if they were good for climbing trees. Ethan stopped comparing his mother to Linda, stopped mentioning her at all, as if she'd been a character in a story they'd outgrown. Kathy joined a hiking group, not for weight loss but for mountains. She started swimming laps at dawn, not to burn calories but to feel powerful. She took a pottery class where her hands created instead of constantly cleaning. Her body responded not by shrinking but by strengthening, becoming more itself rather than less. The other mothers at school noticed. Not weight loss. Kathy remained soft in all the places motherhood had expanded her, but presence. She no longer stood at the edges of conversations, shrinking into herself. She no longer declined photos, claiming she'd join once she lost the baby weight. The babies were 7. She existed fully, completely, without asterisks or apologies. When Julio showed up to Daniel's soccer game one Saturday, Linda long gone and his loneliness visible in the slump of his shoulders, he saw his ex-wife commanding the sideline. She was coaching the younger kids, her voice strong and certain, her body moving with purpose rather than self-consciousness. She wore athletic clothes that fit rather than hid, her gray roots growing in because she'd stopped dyeing them for anyone else's comfort. He approached her after the game, while she was distributing orange slices she'd cut that morning, diagonal for Ethan, straight for Emma, Daniel preferring them whole. "You look." He started, then stopped, realizing he had no vocabulary for what he was seeing. She didn't look younger or thinner. She looked like herself, fully inhabited, no longer performing femininity for his approval. She waited, orange juice sticky on her fingers, children swirling around her legs like she was the sun in their solar system. When he didn't finish, she turned away, not rudely but completely, her attention returning to what mattered. Share this video with every woman who needs to hear that her worth isn't measured by her waistline. Because we're done letting men's shallow preferences determine our value. That night, Kathy had the conversation with her sons that would shape their future relationships. She sat them down after dinner, speaking truths she'd never voiced while trying to save a marriage that couldn't be saved. She told them bodies change, it's what bodies do. She explained that their father hadn't left because she'd gained weight. He'd left because he'd never learned that love deepens as bodies soften. She taught them that partners who love conditionally based on appearance will always find reasons to leave, because perfection is a moving target nobody can hit forever. Daniel, wise beyond his 12 years, asked if Dad would come back now that Linda was gone. Kathy's answer was gentle but clear. Sometimes people break things they don't know how to fix. The twins wanted to know if Mommy was sad. She told them the truth. She had been devastated, but sadness can teach you who you really are when nobody's watching. And who she was, she discovered, was someone who didn't need anyone's permission to take up space in the world. 6 months later, at the school spring festival, Kathy ran the cakewalk in a sundress that showed her arms, laughing as children circled to music she controlled. Julio stood at the entrance, having arrived late to pick up the kids, watching his ex-wife exist without apology. She wasn't trying to make him jealous. She wasn't performing happiness for his benefit. She was simply living, fully present in her body, surrounded by people who loved her not despite her size but including it, because her body was part of her story, not separate from it. The woman he'd left for being too much had finally realized the truth. She'd never been too much. He'd simply been too small to love beyond surfaces, too shallow to value sacrifice over symmetry, too weak to grow alongside someone instead of constantly shopping for replacements. My beautiful family, if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't negotiable. And drop a comment about what you learned, because your stories help others heal. Kathy didn't lose her marriage because she got fat. She lost it because Julio never learned how to love a woman beyond her appearance. He'd confused a wedding with a beauty contract, forgotten that vows were about weathering changes together, not abandoning ship when bodies did what bodies do: change, adapt, survive, tell stories. The last image isn't of Kathy transformed into someone new, but of Kathy finally being who she'd always been underneath the apologies. A woman who'd earned every pound through love and labor. A mother who'd traded her waistline for her children's existence. A human who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that the right person would love her not at her smallest, but at her fullest, because that's when she was most herself. Bodies change. Loyalty shouldn't. But sometimes it takes losing someone who never really saw you to finally see yourself clearly. And what Kathy saw finally was someone worth choosing. Stretch marks, soft belly, gray roots, and all.